Hello, and welcome to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. I'm Tracy Friedlander, and I'm so happy you're joining us for this chat. Today, we continued the conversation from my post I did this week about old school abuse. This is a style of teaching that I was exposed to during my undergraduate study. I decided it was time to air out this experience and put it out into the open because it needs to stop. In talking about this story and who I was at the time, how I handled it, and what happened next after I left this person's studio came a valuable discussion about taking these life lessons and turning them around to impact your life and your career in a positive way. This was such a great chat. Thank you for listening. Let's get started. Hey, Eileen, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. So, yesterday I put a post on, we worked on it together, and I'd say it was a tough post to write. It
Hmm.
was about what we kind of we dubbed it old school abuse because I had a teacher in my undergrad who, his teaching style was very abusive.
Abusive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he would yell very loudly while I was playing. He would say things like he would just be always rolling his eyes like, oh my God, no. Like I was just doing the dumbest thing or the most fucked up thing ever. Like it was always like that feeling of Jesus Christ, you know?
Hmm.
And then basically when I first started with him, it was like, yeah, we just have to start over, you know,
Hey,
telling
I'm
me that.
curious. Yeah, like how long, obviously you got accepted and then you started lessons. How soon into taking lessons did you realize that this guy was off the chain?
I remember it being pretty immediate. Like I
Okay.
remember being like, "Oh, geez,
Okay.
this is not what I thought." Because you know, and I think I might have had a lesson with him before I auditioned.
How was that?
That was, and my parents were there. You know, it was nice. He was on his
Oh,
best behavior.
your parents were there. Okay, well that explains it.
Yeah, so it was a show. It was a show to get me in the
Hmm.
door.
Yep.
And you know what I know now is that he struggled to keep people in his studio.
Right.
So, um,
Right.
but like so I experienced that, and it was funny because the post came out of a conversation um about something else, and we were texting about something, and I said, yeah, well, I remember it was because I was getting ready to audition for a music festival many years after I was done at Indiana, and
Hmm.
I was subbing at New World, and someone said, "Oh yeah, you should play for our coach this week. He comes down from Boston, and he's involved with the festival and da da da. And if you play for him, you know he'll know you, and then that might help you get in." So
Oh, right. Right.
yeah, so
Right.
I played for him, and you were
Okay.
like, "Well, you were asking me about that," and I was like, "Well, that was like it reminded me of my." Kind of old school abuse situation. You were like, hey, that's a good term for it. But he did the same thing, sort of similar thing in the lesson, like, who where did where did you get the idea that you should play that piece like that? Like, what are you doing? Like that's ridiculous, you know? Like
Wow.
as if I was a complete idiot, you know? And I was like, I was stunned because I didn't expect that because when I met him, he seemed nice enough. And it reminded me of my, oh, I just said the name.
Well, I mean, anybody can go look in the archives and see who you're talking about. And I think,
Exactly.
the important thing too, though, about this old school abuse, and this is why we didn't name names. I didn't name names about the person that got fired because of me. And, Tracy didn't name names in the post. Not that you can't go look it up, but the
Right. And
point of,
someone knew who it was anyway, because,
yeah, somebody knew who it was, and other people do too. I mean, other
yeah,
people can, they can do the math. And
right.
so, if anybody knows how old you are, 43, they can figure it out. You know what I'm saying? So, but here's the point though. The point of the old school abuse post is not, it's not about who did it, because honestly, it doesn't matter who did it because it's
Right.
still being done today. It's still being done today by people who lived through old school abuse and then adopted that style of teaching. Like
Yeah.
you cannot be a golden era teacher and still practice old school abuse because you came from old school abuse. That's the
Right.
truth.
And the commenter who happened to be a colleague of mine from a previous job that I had, he said, his comment was valid. He said, just keep in mind that everyone from the golden era wasn't an old school abuse style teacher. And I 100% agree. It doesn't mean just because you're from that golden era that you're an abusive teacher.
And you might know we didn't say that in the post either.
Yeah.
We didn't say everybody from the golden era
Exactly.
does old school. We didn't say that. We said they typically come from the golden era.
Exactly.
And actually that is true for me. So all the old school abuse that I experienced, and I experienced plenty, all came from either a background where they were abused or just they're from the golden era.
Mm-hmm.
One of the two.
Yeah.
Because I know who they studied with. Like I know who I studied with, who they studied with. I know the teaching of that person.
Right.
And so that's what's important about it. The who doesn't matter. I think a lot of times we focus so much on the who. The who doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who it was. And
Right.
that's why we didn't name names. This is not about making people wrong. This is about calling out a teaching style that's unacceptable and unnecessary. And a lot of musicians have dealt with it. A lot.
Yep.
I know I'm not the only one. I know you're not the only one. I bet if you and I went back to our undergrad and asked people, I mean, I would say, I'm guessing 8 out of 10 have experienced it.
Yeah, at some point or another with somebody.
At some point or another. If you've had multiple teachers, and especially because, how many of us have gone to summer camp and we had a teacher for summer camp, or we had, we played for somebody, we decided to pay for a premium lesson with somebody golden era, and then that happened there. I mean, I took so many lessons with so many people. It happened numerous times.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily with people I studied with for a long time. It may have been somebody I studied with for a summer.
Yep.
So that's why I say I think everybody, a very large portion, 8 out of 10, I'm going to say, that's a guess. Musicians have dealt with it because if you've had multiple teachers, it's probably happened.
Exactly.
So that's what I want to say about that.
Yeah. And so that was going on. And as we were talking about it just now, actually, before we started recording, I was, I was thinking about the type of person I was back then and like how, you were saying, fuck, if someone ever talked to me like that, I would tell them to fuck off.
If somebody yelled at me in my lesson, that would not have gone well. I'm just saying.
Right.
Because I was always this much of a firecracker that I am now. I was. No, for real. I was. I mean,
no,
I'm definitely stronger now that I'm older, but I was strong back then too. Like nobody would have gotten away with yelling at me in a lesson.
Right.
But it just depends on who you are at the time,
Yeah. And I wasn't a person that would have told someone older than me to, to sit down and shut up. I wish I would have. But so my MO at the time, and for a really long time after that, was to just escape. And so when he was on sabbatical, and there was another teacher that took his place who was a really sweet person. I really liked him. And I said, look, I'm planning my escape while you're here. Mm-hmm. I just told him that, And he was I remember it being therapeutic. Like he was a friend. He was an old friend of the perpetrator. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, this isn't, I remember talking to him about it. And that was like probably the first time I ever talked to somebody about it. Mm-hmm. And so like I wrote him a letter because this was pre-email.
So and you wrote the perp a letter?
The perp. Yeah. I wrote him a letter saying that I wasn't going to be in his studio when he got back from sabbatical. And of course he didn't reply, and he never spoke to me again. I saw him numerous times, in the hallway and everything.
I was going to say, the awkward saunter down the hall, right by the guy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was like I was invisible.
Oh yeah. I'm sure.
So I changed studios to the other teacher. There were 3, and so this is what we were talking about too. There were 3 teachers at Indiana at the time, and the second there were people viewed it as that there were two teachers that were the teachers for the music majors and people who were serious about becoming musicians after school. And there was a third teacher who was for minors or people who were just taking lessons for fun or people who were education majors, things like that. Like
Mhm.
they made it to be that. I just remember some people telling me that it was just a general vibe that I noticed people in the top orchestras weren't studying with him and who knows what political stuff was going on to create that situation. But in my mind, he was not, third choice was not a choice for me. Now the
Okay.
second choice was a good choice. He had a full studio. Everyone loved him. But the third choice didn't seem like a choice for me. And now I'm good friends with some people who are good friends with him and know a lot more about his career than I knew at the time, and told me that this is completely incorrect. Like that he's a phenomenal teacher and would have been great. I'm sure he would have been great for me, really great,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
And it's really a shame that I had that impression back then.
Well, yeah, and that speaks to something that I think is important for everybody to know, which is that, um, we talked last week, we talked about, Facebook and public figure page and branding and sort of thing, like the brand that you're putting out there for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, there's numerous ways to put a brand out. We suggested a way last week, but, here's what you want to know is that, this guy you're talking about, the reason you didn't study with him is because of what everybody said about him,
Hmm.
right? And obviously you notice some things like who's studying with him, what orchestra are they in,
Yeah.
and you said it was mostly education majors who were studying with him.
Yeah, I just noticed that nobody, because you know how it's a big deal. Like, are you in the top orchestra? Which orchestra are you?
Right,
Top
right, right,
orchestra?
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You
And so
know?
and so you so automatically you go, well, nobody in the top orchestra is studying with him, so he must not be a top teacher. That was part of
Exactly.
it.
Yeah.
But the other part of it was that there was this conversation that went on in the music school, which was, oh, the education majors study with him,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So here's what you want to get about that, everybody who's listening, is that you are what people say you are.
Yeah.
You are what people say you are. Now, so in other words, a lot of people think their brand is their logo and the color palette that they chose. Like it's here's my business card. Like this is my brand.
Yeah.
Here's what you want to get. First of all, if nobody's talking about you yet, you don't have a brand. That's not a
Hmm.
problem. But just know that if nobody's talking about you, don't have a brand. And what people are saying about you is what your brand is.
Interesting.
So, like, a great example is this guy that you're talking about, this horn player, this horn teacher that you're talking about. His brand was what everybody said about him. Why? Because you chose to work with him or not work with him. Everybody did based on that brand.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to get it. Like, that's flat out how it is.
And you can see it in so many other places. Like if you think
Yeah.
about like celebrities or,
Yep.
or even companies, like what they say they are versus what everyone actually knows they are, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that, Kim Kardashian would say that her brand is something specific, but what her audience says is actually what her brand is.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's how they decide to interact with her, what they want to, and I'm just using her as an example. It could be anybody. I don't care who it is.
Right.
But you just have to understand that your brand is what people are saying about you. You can put out your logo, your colors, your this, your that. Obviously, you want to influence that. Just
Mm-hmm.
understand that. So you may have a certain intention when you go out in the world with you may have a certain branding intention, but just understand that you're achieving it based on what you're getting, what people are saying about you out there. If what they're saying is not what you want them to say, you have to shift it so that they are saying what you want them to say.
Interesting.
And you can influence that. You can.
So how do you find out? You just have to talk to people.
Yeah, you know what? If people, like, for example, let's say you're brand new in the market, let's say, actually, one really good way to find out would be, let's say that you wanted to know what people thought about your brand.
Mm-hmm.
You could send, 5 people out into the world and have them ask classical, hey, have you ever heard of Crushing Classical? What do you think of it?
Mm-hmm.
And they would come back and tell you. And actually, if you wanted a bigger, you could go with, 20 people, 40 people, 50 people. You could deploy 40 or 50 people out there and, into the classical world and have them in conversations or whatever. Hey, have you heard about Crushing Classical? Like they could go into one of the many Facebook groups that exist for classical musicians and say, hey, has anybody heard this podcast before? What do you think of it? And whatever you got back is what your brand is.
Interesting. That totally makes
Out in the
sense.
world,
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. So you just have to go out and get unsolicited feedback, because if you went out there and everybody knew that it was they would just lie to you. Oh, it's great. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
That's what they would do. I mean, they wouldn't tell you if they didn't like it, or, they wouldn't tell you if, they thought we were obnoxious on the Fireside Chats. They're not going to tell you that. Well, I mean,
Yeah, of
classical
course.
musicians are polite already.
Yeah.
That's part of the issue.
Yeah.
Like they're not even willing to say what they think most of the time anyway. So, they're not going to tell you, they're certainly not going to tell you to your face.
Right. Definitely
Right?
not.
So the
Yeah.
best way to find out what your brand is to go have somebody ask about it. And listen, the other thing about, do you have a brand? That's why I say if you're not being talked about, you don't have a brand. Because if you go out there and you say, do you know who so-and-so is? And they go, I have no idea. And you ask 100 people and they're like, I have no idea. And it's your target audience. Then you know that right now you just have no brand.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean by you don't have a brand unless people are talking about you, because you just don't. Nobody knows who you are. So there
That
is
makes
no
sense. Right.
brand. Right?
That makes sense.
So,
Yeah. It's like, have you
anyway,
heard of this new soda? It tastes a lot like Coke and Pepsi, but it's called, I don't know, whatever. And
right.
they're like, no, I haven't heard of it. Then it's non-existent essentially.
That's right. It doesn't exist. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, nobody wants to hear that because everybody wants to think they're important. I'm not saying you're not important. I'm saying you don't have a brand. It's two different
Right.
things.
Right. So
You
tell
know?
me what you think that particular teacher could have done. I don't know if he knew that that's what people were saying, and maybe he didn't care because,
It's possible. Okay, so a lot of people don't actually pay attention to their brand, and I think that's probably the case with this guy, is he wasn't paying attention to it. Like he may, part of it too, maybe he wasn't trying to build his career or his resume, but if he was, like, let's say,
yeah.
if he was intentionally trying to build a brand where he was producing top players,
Mhm.
then what I would be doing if I were him is going out and recruiting the top players.
Right. Okay.
So in other words, I would recruit certain people and say, if I wanted to be a horn teacher for people specifically wanting to get into an orchestra, like get into a top 5,
Mhm.
I would literally go out and recruit students who absolutely unequivocally want to get into a top 5.
Right.
And I would make everything about that. Everything I publish would be about that. Every article I publish, like I would publish articles about it. I would do social media about it. I would call, I would give myself a title, top 5 orchestra horn teacher.
That's a good title. If that's
I'm
what you
making
want
that
to.
up, right?
Right.
But you get what I'm saying? Like I would brand myself that way. So branding is two sides. There's a side that you are pushing of who you are. And then there's what you're creating on the opposite end, which is what people say about you. When those two are a match, you won the game.
Right. So you're definitely going to lose the game if you're not saying anything about yourself because
That's
you're just
correct.
leaving
If
it
you're not,
completely.
because people are going to say things about you.
Yeah.
They're going to say things about you. You get to, you're either going to influence that or you're not.
Right.
That's a choice.
Right.
You don't have to. You don't have to influence it, but, what kind of a career do you want?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say.
Interesting. So, we were before we started the recording, you were talking about another teacher of yours who, we were talking about good teachers and bad teachers and,
Yeah.
teachers that really stood out. And you had one in particular that really revolutionized not only the way that you played, but also the way that you thought about things so much in your regular life, just in life in general. And so I thought that
Yeah.
was really fascinating. I don't know if she branded herself that way at all, or if that's just what
No,
people were saying about her, or that's what you
no.
just.
Yeah, so she's not a brander at all. Like this is not somebody who would ever brand herself. She's so humble.
Uh huh.
That's the first thing I'll say about her. But, so I actually started studying with her back when, it was actually when I went to Interlochen. I studied with her. And, um, so I had just come out of a very, what I'm going to say, um, I'm not going to call it, I'm not going to say it was old school abuse, but it was a very repressed teaching situation. Like I just felt trapped. I was not inspired. I definitely wanted to still play. That wasn't the problem. I just, um,
What was different about what? Why would you say it wasn't old school abuse, but that it still wasn't? Was it just not like you guys weren't a good fit, or what made
I
it?
mean, we studied together for a long time. And there wasn't yelling at all. Like I didn't have the yelling thing that you had
Uh-huh.
in this situation. It was more like a, uh, offhand comments that he made. Like I think he's a decent person, but it was just like a. I really never. I really rarely felt like I did anything right.
Mm.
Was I think the problem. I mean, there comes a point when you study with somebody. I think this is true for anytime you study with a teacher. There has to be some acknowledgement. There doesn't have to be a lot for me, but because I know if I do well or not. But there has to be some acknowledgement. I just felt like there wasn't very much of that, so I definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I was thinking about this last night because would I classify it as old school abuse? I don't. It really depends. Like there were some years I felt like it was more leaning more that direction. There were other years where it was a little softer.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always a repressed situation. Like I just felt very repressed in the situation. And so going to Interlochen was like, whew, I get to study with somebody new. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
And I'd already taken a lesson with this woman that I'm about to talk about. And, but what was so cool about her, is that I remember going into my first lesson, my very first lesson with her and of the school year. And, I played a passage. It was, I don't know, it was an etude, I think. And I played a passage and she said, so what did you think of that? Which nobody ever asked me that before.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I thought it sucked. And she said, okay, so this is the first part of this is the first teaching you're going to get from me here, which is, there is no such thing as it sucks. There is only, you're going to tell me, so I want you to break it up. I want you to tell me what you did well, first of all, and then I want you to tell me where it needs improvement,
Mm-hmm.
specifically. And we took the whole lesson, I think, doing that because I had such a hard time with that exercise. To be able to say specifically what I did well, I mean, I'd spent, I don't know, 5 or 6 years feeling like I did everything wrong.
Yeah.
So in my view, nothing was really good.
Right.
And so I suddenly had to find good things about my playing, and then I had to find things that needed improvement. Of course, the list of improvement was longer than the list of things I did well.
Mm-hmm.
And then she did it. So she had me do it, and then she did it. She said, okay, so this is what I thought you did well. And she gave me a list, and it was very long. And then she said, these are the places I think you need improvement. And then she gave me a list. And so our lists were not matching. But she told me the goal, I can't remember how she put it, but it was like the goal of the semester was that by the end of the semester, our lists were closer. Like that
Awesome.
we could hear my playing as it was instead of how much I wanted to trash myself.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because that was her point was you spend so much time trashing your playing, and then you end up working on things there's nothing wrong with them. So what she did was she saved me time. She started to help me develop my own ear about my own playing, so that I wasn't spending time working on things that there was nothing wrong with them.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that
Yeah.
I took an immediate leap in my playing. Like, it was immediate when I started to hear what she was hearing. It was immediate. It was like I leaped, 15 levels because of that. Because I stopped spending time on things that all I was doing was making myself feel bad about something that wasn't wrong.
Mm.
If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely it does. Yeah.
And it's really, it's the best thing she ever taught me, and it's the thing that I've carried through into my life since.
What I love about it is that it's not emotional. It's like,
No.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
why do we always have to make it about who we are as a person, or that the wrong making, like, oh geez, I suck, like,
Yep.
because I played that badly turns into that sucked turns into I suck.
I suck. Yep.
Oh my God,
And
how
it's
many
so
times did I say
counterproductive.
that?
It's so counterproductive. And as she said, then you end up working on things that there was nothing wrong with them in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't accurately critique your playing, how can you accurately fix your playing?
Totally.
That's the question,
Because when you say to yourself, I suck, where do you start? I mean,
Yeah.
there's nowhere to start. It's just
Where do you
like
start?
devastation.
Exactly. And look, there may be a lot of things to improve. It's not that. I mean, there's always something to improve. When is there not something to improve?
Exactly. Yeah.
But she really gave me it was the first objectivity. It was the first time I was ever taught objectivity where music making is concerned, where improvement is concerned, like developing myself as a player, as a musician. So I really feel like she taught me how to think, but then she also carried that through into, we had a master class. I can't remember how often it was. I think it was maybe every couple of weeks. And we all got together at the chapel, and it was on Sunday, and it was a few hours, I think. And, people were selected to play. And so one of the things that so there were a few players for the session, and she would always have us critique first. She never critiqued first. It was always, okay, somebody plays, and then we all offered critique. And I think everybody was asked to critique at least once during the masterclass. So in other words,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't have to critique on everybody, but you had to critique that day.
Right.
And then I figured out why she did that. So, she taught us, she would listen to our feedback, and then she would correct our feedback, but she did it in such a masterful way. She would say, if you critiqued a person in a certain way and she felt it was either an attack or poorly worded, or there was another angle or another way to think about it, she would dive in and she would critique the critique. So she wasn't critiquing the player, she was critiquing the critique.
That's great.
And yeah, and so by the end of, the year, we were all masters at critiquing. Like, we were as good, maybe not as good, but we were getting to her level of critique, because her critiques were amazing. And let's be honest, all musicians really know how to do is just be shitty to each other.
And pick out what's wrong.
Yeah. You tell everybody what's wrong. You say shitty things. You do like an underhanded cut, a little slam here and there,
Mm-hmm.
a little, passive aggressive comment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's why sometimes it's hard to flip the switch and go, when you start to think about collaboration.
Yeah.
You go, wait a second, these people have been, the, not the enemy, but like just you're over there and I'm over here, you're doing it wrong, I'm doing it right, like black and white,
Yeah.
everything. And then you switch and go, wait a second. Like, I remember, the first time you introduced the idea of wanting someone else to win
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
And it was new. You asked me
Yep.
that about my husband because David
Yep.
was working on Audition X Factor, and you said, "What are you going to do to help him win today?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" Because to me, it
Yep.
meant either he had to do it on his own and figure it the fuck out, or I had to do it for him.
And that's what's so funny is that that's how everybody lives, and everything is black and white.
Yeah.
That's how musicians live, but that's how a lot of humans live. So either you're striking somebody down and telling them they suck and they're losers, or you're going, "Oh my God, you're the most amazing thing in the world." But there's something in between.
Yeah,
And that's
and we
what
also do it to ourselves too. Everyone does it
totally,
to themselves.
100%, which is the whole "I suck" or "that was amazing."
Yeah.
And rarely is it amazing, so pretty much you suck,
Yeah.
you know? But
Yeah.
really, like that's the whole thing is what I love about what she taught was, and I've carried it with me to this day, is that there's good in everything and there's also improvement and everybody has value. So you don't attack, you got to be really careful. The point is not to attack the human, and it's not even to attack the work. It's to acknowledge the human and the work and improve what needs improvement
Mm-hmm.
and speak to what needs improvement, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about her is that she made us all what I mean, I really think she made us all human. I think, I became a human because of her. I mean, and to accept my humanity and accept everyone else's humanity. And we had a really good relationship. Like our studio was very close, very tight, very supportive of each other. And I fully, give her all the credit for that because she created that in the way she taught us individually and as a group in masterclass. She created that environment in our studio. And there are plenty of studios, I want you to know, that at Interlochen that were at odds.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty. And ours was not one of them,
Right.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. So I know you wanted to touch on that whole idea, which so you're essentially saying that you transferred what you learned about critiquing other clarinet players and critiquing your own playing on the clarinet into your life in general. And so that's kind of a concept that one of my teachers introduced to me starting in civic, which he was the conductor of civic and he used to use the term transfer of learning. That's the term he used. And so he would,
It's actually a great term.
it's a great term. And he would say like, when you're in an orchestra rehearsal, I was accustomed to just, screwing around or spacing out during the time that the conductor was working on strings or woodwinds or something, because that didn't apply to me. He was talking to a different instrument group. And he made that like, that's not how we do things here. Like, I'm going to say something to the strings or the winds while you're sitting there, and more than likely it's going to transfer to something that you have to do later. Or you might come up with a question, hey, does this, is that phrasing going to work when that melody is in my part? Or, there's so many different examples of what he meant by that, but he, and he would point it out. If someone would raise their hand and ask, or he would say, now brass, I'm going to work with you. If you were paying attention and using transfer of learning, you will know how I want this phrase already.
Yep.
And so sometimes people will be like, oh shit, I wasn't paying attention to what he was saying.
I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
Right?
But it was awesome because it saved time. It saves time because you go, oh, we're a collective group of people making music together. It's not like I'm sitting here and my only job is to play the notes on my page, and once I'm done, I can clock out, kind of thing. And unfortunately for me is that experience in civic, and that holistic way of learning music and really getting the detail and connecting the dots like that isn't really generally employed all the time in the real world, in the quote unquote real world. And people who didn't come through that kind of training don't always look at their experience in rehearsal like that. So it's kind of a rude awakening sometimes. You come out and you're like, oh, school is, educational situations are so much more fulfilling sometimes. But so I really love that transfer of learning idea. It brings me back to how great that that experience was in civics. So why don't you talk a little bit about that with how you felt that that applied to the teaching that she did?
Well, I mean, I think the general experience that I have, like especially being out in the business world, is that people just don't adapt things very well. So they don't, they learn something in one place, but it's like, when they're not in that situation anymore, they don't apply it it's like they forget about it completely.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many things you learn, and if you're not adapting them to the rest of your life, you're really making a mistake. Everything that happens to you can be applied to so many areas of your life. And I think, the biggest thing I've always been very, very good at adapting what I learned from, from different experiences I've had to other aspects of my life. And I always, for some reason, I just always remember things like, what I was taught by her, and continuing to carry that into my life, even in the business world. It's definitely impacted how I critique. It's definitely impacted how I critique myself, all that. And so what I think is, what I see lacking a lot in humanity is they just don't adapt. They don't adapt what they learn from one situation to another.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they have to be reminded. And I think that's unfortunate. Like you have to keep those experiences present for yourself somehow. You have to, because at least let it become part of who you are. I mean, if you really believe in it, you have to let it become part of who you are, such that you implement it into your life. I think what people do is they separate themselves from what they've learned, like they're somehow separate. Oh, there's this thing I learned, and then there's me. No, if you love what you learned and it made a difference for you, then let it become who you are.
Mm.
I think that's the disconnect that I see all
Wow.
the time. Yeah, you have to let it become who you are. And I would say that experience, I decided to adopt it as if I authored it. And today it's how I do everything.
I love that idea of as if you authored it. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I mean, I got it from her, but now I behave like I authored it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, that's a testament actually really to her and how great she was. Because it really was, and probably still is. I'm not in touch with her anymore, but it probably still is who she is. I mean, that's what I got out of, I got to see, she was a phenomenal player, but what I love about her is that she's such an incredible human. And what I think classical musicians don't think about is, what if you could be a phenomenal player and a phenomenal human? I don't think enough time is spent on the human part. That's what she showed me.
Yes.
You can be both. You can be both. And very, very few classical musicians, I hate to say this, work on that.
Yeah. Well, no, I completely agree with you. And take the example of, me being in that situation at Indiana, right? Here I was, and I played out that kind of same sort of thing a number of times in my life where here I was in a situation, wasn't working I was in it for a while, it was bad, wasn't working for me. I left. I just
Mm-hmm.
escaped it. Like
Escape. Yep.
instead of confronting the
Yep.
situation.
Yep.
So I started to see that maybe last summer. I started working on these things. Of course, you and I were talking, and you have a
Mm-hmm.
tendency to ask certain questions that lead you in places. And so we were doing this renovation, and
Oh, yes.
yeah, so I wanted to share this story because this was the first time that I started to confront
Oh,
my
this is such a great story too. I know the story you're going to tell.
yeah. So, and you really helped me through it, and it's so I'm going to share it. We were at the very beginning stages. We had an architect or a designer, sketch out what we were going to do on the back of our house. We changed we changed a room, we changed the roof of a room, and then we added another room and a screen and porch. Problem is, there's a giant tulip poplar that's about 80 years old, and it was close enough to the house that we were going to have to be a little creative about where we put the foundation and stuff. And we needed to get, so we had a builder who was very experienced, and he'd been a builder for like 40, 45 years. And he's like, yeah, I know what I'm going to do. This is not a problem. But according to some, with permits and this and that, we had to get some drawings done from some engineers, some engineered plans. So they took the drawings that the designer did and engineered them up. I don't know what they do, whatever. All I know is it was like $1,200 for them to sit in their computer and like do whatever.
All I remember is the price.
Yeah, and call me up and say, look, this tree is a problem. It's not going to work. You're going to have to cut it down. You're going to damage the roots if you put the foundation here. It's not going to work. And, I was upset because the entire time that we were making this plan, I said, we'll do this, but we have to do it in a way that keeps the tree. This is a great tree. It's a beautiful tree. It's friggin' old and I love it. I don't want it to go anywhere. And so, so we were doing this renovation and I had the engineered plans and they were saying all this stuff like that our builder was like, no, like we had this big giant stoop. Essentially. It was like this massive hunk of concrete that was the steps. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about where we're going to put the footers, which are hunks of concrete that you put in the ground to build on. And the engineers said that I was going to have to take out the stoop. And, and I remember Don said, that's the biggest fucking footer you're ever going to see. You're not taking that out,
right?
like.
I mean, how are you going to? I mean, because I remember seeing a picture of it and going, there's no way anyone's going to get that out. Like, that's not, that would take like, a crane.
No kidding. I know. And it would have been like, what would I jackhammer it and then make a new one? I mean, it didn't make sense. And so I was kind of floundering like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And I was mad that the guy was, not getting back to me. And I thought I was supposed to have the plans in hand and then I didn't hear from him. And then I finally got somebody on the phone and they're like, and I said, I need to hear from you. And they're kind of giving me the runaround. And I remember calling you and going, these engineered plans are screwing with me, or these engineers are not getting back to me. And you said, call them back and demand them to come over or something and take care of it.
Yeah.
And I was really nervous, but I called them and I said, you need to come over here tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about this in person. And the guy was like, I was like,
didn't he say he had to go to another,
location? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
He had to go to Durham. And I said, well, you're going to come here first.
And see, this is the whole thing is you have to understand is that, most human beings, if you say that to them, they're just going to show up because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle that,
They were he was flustered. He was like, I promise someone's going to call you back in 20 minutes, because he was like the assistant. He wasn't the head honcho person. Mm-hmm. And so then eventually, I talked to Don and Don was like, look, that's the biggest footer you're going to have. I know exactly what I'm going to do. These engineers they haven't built anything. I'm a builder. I've done this. I know what to do.
They've drawn plans, but they've never built anything.
Exactly. And so he's like, get the plans, pay them, get them. I'll do what I want, And so that night I went to bed and, it was a big deal for me to confront those engineers. I hadn't done that.
Scared. Yeah, I know you were scared.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I went to sleep and, I woke up like in the middle of the night. I just opened my eyes and I was like, oh my gosh, the stoop represents like standing for something and not moving. Like you can't move that stoop. It weighs like, 5 tons. It's not moving. And then I was like, and Don is a stoop. Mm-hmm. He wasn't going to move on it. He wasn't going to cut down the tree. He wasn't going to take out the stoop.
Yep.
He's like, you guys can say whatever you want, but I know what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. And it was like this major realization, like I am not a stoop.
Yep.
But it was like in that moment, I became one. I saw how I could be one.
Yeah. And this the thing is that you don't realize you're a stoop until you actually get that, there was like a metaphor there, sort of like you made a connection there. Mm-hmm. You can't be something that you don't know what it is.
Right.
You have to know what it is first and then you can be it. Like, you know what I mean? Like Until you saw that, you couldn't be a stoop.
Exactly. And in the past, I may have gone, um, okay, Don knows what he's going to do. I'll just, I don't, I'll let him take care of it and just kind of run away from the situation. But
Mhm.
it was like it hit me over the head like a ton of bricks. Like, oh, so people can be, situations and something in the environment,
Mhm.
you know, can be like the hurricane,
Yep.
but if you're a 5-ton stoop,
Yep.
you're not moving
Nope.
no
Not
matter
moving.
what. Like
Yeah,
this
like
entire house could blow down, but that stoop will still be.
that stoop's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question about it. And that is very true that yeah, I totally agree with you. And the thing that people don't realize is the reason why life doesn't go their way is because they're not being a stoop. Period.
Hmm.
You know. And for a long time I recognize, that's how you were as well. Um oh, that's how they think we should do it. Okay, then we'll do it that way. Um if there was any conflict, you avoided it, that sort of thing. You've obviously changed
Yeah.
a lot,
Yeah.
a lot since then.
Yeah, a lot. Like I've made major, and one of the biggest things was for me to look into my life and go, huh, maybe that decision I made to do this or that, maybe it's not working.
Hmm.
Just because I said that that's what I wanted to do before,
Right.
you figure out what you're a stoop for, what you're standing for,
Hmm.
and if you made a decision in the past that doesn't align with what you actually really want for your life, then change.
Yeah, you have to
So
change it.
that's what right. So that's what I would like. That's kind of what I've been doing since that stoop moment. And granted, stoop moment. Granted, there have been moments where you're like, "Where's the stoop? I don't see her."
Yeah,
And
for
I'm like,
sure.
"Shit."
I know.
But
I text you sometimes, and I'm like, Stoop isn't here today.
yeah, and I'm like, "Damn it!" But in general, what happens is I go back to that
Hmm.
since that revelation, which was like massive. It was a massive revelation for me that day.
Hmm.
It was like someone pulled the blinders off of me.
Yep.
And I started to approach my life in a totally different way.
Yeah. Totally.
Um,
I remember the day that happened, I know it happened overnight,
it
and
was
then
on a
that
Wednesday.
morning, yeah,
Yeah.
I think, well, yeah. So that morning though, you woke up and you were looking around your house and you're like, holy crap! There were things about your house that you immediately could not tolerate anymore. Do you remember that?
Hmm. Yeah.
It was that day.
Yeah.
It was like you had such a new view that when you looked at your house, you had a different view of your house.
Yeah.
Like the inside. And I'm not just talking about the renovation. I'm talking about, the way you organize things, the way the kitchen was, the way,
Uh-huh.
everything. Like all these things, the way the dog food was that you
Yeah.
fixed at one point, right?
Yeah.
There were a bunch of things that were not working, but you couldn't see until you became a stoop.
Yeah. And I remember texting you that morning and I was like, and this? And
Yep.
like as the texts were going, you're like, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep. Yeah. I mean,
So
that was a really cool day, actually.
yeah, it was.
It's a cool day. So yeah, I mean, you have to there's a lot of people who are running their lives exactly like you're talking about. Just, I call it sitting on the fence waiting for the wind to blow.
Hmm.
You're either going to blow one way or you're going to blow the other way.
Yeah, that's not stoop. That's like the
Nope.
hurricane comes and you blow 30
That's right.
miles away and you
That's
can't
right.
you can't help it.
The hurricane's going to decide where you go. You're not,
Hmm.
you know.
And the hurricane can be anything. The hurricane can be someone coming in a bad mood, ruining your day,
That's right.
or the hurricane can be, you know, any number of things. Usually, when I say environment, I mean the immediate people around you. The
Yeah,
hurricane can be you turn on the TV and you see Donald Trump did something dumb and you're pissed off for the rest of the week.
that's right.
Why? Why? You
Yep.
know, like why do that to yourself?
Yep.
Why let some other outside thing screw with you?
Yep. Exactly. It doesn't have to go that way. And so, yeah, I mean, I get it. It's a really good example, I think.
Yeah, so that was an example, I guess. I know that's a little far-fetched from like actually taking something you learned in music and applying it to your life, but this was like something that happened to me in my life that I then took it as if I authored it, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. And now, you're just applying it, improving on it, noticing when it's there, noticing when it's not there.
Yep.
When
Yeah.
you're not being that, when you are being that, and then you've always got, me reminding you when you're
Hmm.
not.
Which helps. It really does. And usually I'm like, oh, geez, you're
Yeah,
right.
I know.
You
Stoop's
know?
not here today is what I usually text. And I know. I always know when Stoop is there or not. I always know. I can tell.
Yeah.
I don't even have to talk to you and I can tell.
Hmm.
You just tell me what's happening and I know. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting concept. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So transfer of learning, it's a big deal. I think we could definitely talk more about this on other fireside chats.
I'm sure it'll come up.
Yeah. Um, and I'm just enjoying talking, continuing the conversation about branding and what that means
Hmm.
and, how it gets created. Because it's really a step-by-step process
It's an evolve.
and
It's an evolution for sure.
it's an evolution.
We're
Yeah.
going through it as well.
We're going through it. Like we said on the last fireside chat, we both started our public figure pages, and we want to be um, open about how it's going because we're doing it along with you.
Yeah, we can talk about that actually next week if you want. On the
Yeah.
fireside chat, we can talk about what we're doing. We actually created a game, and we can invite people to play along with us if you want.
Oh, that's a great idea.
So let's talk about it next week, and then they can play if they want to play along with us.
It's a good game.
Yeah, it's a good game. So cool.
Great. Okay, thank you guys. Thank you for joining the fireside chat today. If you're enjoying Crushing Classical, please write a review on iTunes and join us in the conversation on facebook.com/Crushing Classical, on Instagram at Crushing Classical, and write comments. We just want to hear from you. We really do. We want to
Yeah,
hear
we'd
your
love to hear
insights,
from you. Love your messages. Love your
everything.
comments. Everything. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon or
Okay. Talk to you
bye.
soon. Bye.